Welcome back to another episode of This Film Not Rated, a branch of the Drive-In Podcast Network, where we try to not rate movies while trying to be as objective as possible. Now, there's a little bit of a gimmick on this show where we run through a series of questions that we call a gauntlet. And if we can get all 15 of those questions answered completely objectively with no opinions whatsoever in there, then we get a special prize, a special prop from the movie in question. I don't know what we're going to do for this one, though. Ugh.
It'd have to be a script or something.
Mm-hmm. And if we have a guest, which we do on today's episode, then they go through the gauntlet. So, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is GROUCHO. This is my second time returning to, well, I guess my first time returning, my second time on this podcast. And we're going to be talking about one of my very, very favorite movies today.
Can you tell us what that is?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I can. The movie is called Mysterious Skin. It is a indie coming-of-age sort of story that is directed by Gregor Araki. It came out in, I believe, 2004. It stars Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Brady Corbett.
All right.
Yes. And massive trigger warnings for anybody who's going into Mysterious Skin. This is all about sexual abuse and children being involved.
Mm-hmm.
So we, as you guys know, we're a full spoiler podcast. So we're going ahead and dive into our gauntlet questions in just a second. And Groucho is going to lead us through exploring Mysterious Skin. Groucho, are you ready?
I think so.
All right, then. Let's get
completely objective.
Let's get this underway. Groucho, is Mysterious Skin a good or bad movie?
I think that it's a difficult movie. It's a movie that explores very, very complex and uncomfortable topics. So depending on the comfort level of the viewer, I think that question would be answered very widely in either direction. If you look up, reviews or read, about people who have watched it, the consensus is pretty
varied.
It's pretty varied. I feel like the general consensus is that it's very thought-provoking. It's very deep, it's very emotional, and maybe after one watch, people would not want to watch it again, but maybe that they're glad that they watched it once.
Okay. I think we're good on that one. This is not fair for a question for this movie. What's the best scene in Mysterious Skin?
Again, that's obviously going to depend on the viewer's preferences and their thoughts on the subject matter in a lot of ways. If by best we're talking about emotionally impactful, there are scenes that would fall under that category. If by best we're talking about scenes that are fun to watch, that would be a completely different thing. I think this is probably the scene that has the most impact for most viewers would be the final scene of the movie, which is when everything kind of finally comes together. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the story coming full circle so much as the journey that the two main characters of the film have been going on individually finally sort of comes to a joint. And that's sort of the moment of catharsis that the viewer has been waiting for the entire viewing experience.
Yeah, Curtis and I have kind of had this issue before. We talk about, like, there are scenes that are built off of other scenes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I agree that most of the reactions that I've seen point to this as being the most, like, emotional, cathartic.
Yeah.
It also it has a little bit of everything, the hard to watch parts and everything like that in it. So
and without that scene,
it's not that movie.
Yeah, it's the scene that makes or breaks the movie, and it comes at the very end. So I think you're right on that one.
Curtis would have just gotten buzzed out. I think you're right.
Yeah. Thank God I'm not in the gauntlet. Oh God. What should be cut from the movie?
This isn't an easy answer to give because I do think that everything that's in the story does serve a purpose, whether it's like a huge, grand reason for being there that all leads to the final moment, or it's something that's meant to build characters and kind of do some world building to make everything feel very real and relatable.
Mm-hmm.
If there was one aspect of the film that could be cut without affecting any of those things too much, I would argue that it would probably be the building of the friendship between Brian and Eric. I do think that having that there humanizes the character of Brian very much because he's otherwise so awkward and strange and kind of dissociated from the reality that everyone else is living in.
Yeah.
But I do think that the story would still stand without maybe some of those scenes.
So we got to be a little bit rough because basically what this is asking is like, there's a clip that needs to be out of the movie. What do you think
clip.
it is? Like
Okay.
what would you like? What should be cut? Like what? Well, actually, is it Curtis? Is it worded? What would you cut or what should be cut?
What should be?
What should be cut? Okay, maybe I'm just misunderstanding the question a little bit then.
No, you're doing a very good job of keeping things objective. We're trying to make that more difficult.
Okay. Well, actually, now that we're kind of going into this more, I'm having sort of an interesting thought because the most recent time that maybe this is just me like being insane and creating things in my head that were never there. But the most recent time that I watched this movie, I feel like I remember thinking that there had been a scene in the movie that I had seen previously when I watched it when I was younger that I didn't like, that wasn't there this time, like that maybe it had gotten uploaded onto Amazon Prime and like there was a scene that had been cut. So there's the whole like part of the story where Wendy is trying to convince Neil to get a real job once he's already moved to New York. In my memory, there's a scene where he's actively working that job. It's just one scene and he's like at a sandwich shop. Was that scene in the movie when you guys watched it?
It was.
Okay, so the most recent time that I watched it, it wasn't. I don't know why it wasn't there. It was the one scene that I was like, I feel like there was something missing. So with that in mind, I would actually retroactively go back and change my original answer to this question and say that while I do think that the whole, little sub story of Wendy trying to convince Neil to get a regular job is important to, the story and the idea that he needs to sort of move on from his lifestyle. It's so small that I think it actually has less of an effect on the feeling and the tone of the story than the friendship between Eric and Brian. So perhaps that would be the thing that should be cut. There's I guess it's two scenes, but the bit where Wendy's like, you need to get a regular job, and if it's one scene, then the bit where he's actually working in the sandwich shop. Because I will say that when I watched it most recently and that scene was not there, I didn't feel, apart from being a little confused for a second, like it actually had any impact on how I felt about the viewing at all.
Well, I feel really bad about it, but we're gonna have to buzz for that one.
Yeah, I think so.
Because we're trying to come up with a reason or an opinion for that one, and I think we're stuck in that.
I think you were really close to answering that one though. But
it's just having to stick in the realm. This is a movie that I very recently, as sort of a gag, I buzzed myself out like the first question, and I got to tell you, if I was in the gauntlet, I would have buzzed out immediately, like good bag, and be done with that. I don't envy you having to sit here and be like, what would you take away from a person's story who went through this? Like that's
right.
No, there's nothing irrelevant. There's nothing irrelevant at that point. So we have just 3 questions. What made you want to watch this? What do you like and not like about it? And what would make you watch it again? And if you could please just help us kick us one more favor, kick it off for us and tell us what made you pick Mysterious Skin.
Well, I've always been a fan of discussing this movie because I feel like and this is probably due to its NC-17 rating, but it's pretty not well known, especially considering that the lead actor is Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who is very popular and people are really, really big fans of even his more underground films like Brick. But this movie is just one that I mean, I have met, a handful of people who have seen it over the years, but typically when I bring it up, people don't know what it is, which I think is kind of a bummer, because it really talks about some very important topics, and I think it does so with a lot of sincerity and care.
Yes.
Even though it is a really difficult movie to watch, and that's a big part of why I would consider it my favorite film. I mean, I'll admit I'm a big fan of just sort of that indie, kind of lower budget, sort of coming of age, kind of movies in general are pretty much my thing. But I think this one is really on another level of it just hitting like that emotional button and really making someone think. And that's what I look for in movies. That's why I like to write and make movies. That's what I like to talk about when I discuss movies with people. And I think this one just kind of hits all of those so well.
Have you
so
made
that's why I
movie?
picked it. Yes, I have.
Yeah.
No, my feature that I did in 2012, it's called Slight, and it is also kind of like a very low budget sort of indie kind of flick, and it's about a man with multiple sclerosis and sort of his slow decline mentally as he comes to term with the disease and the way that it affects his relationships with other people.
Right.
So I mean, you can kind of tell, like, that's just sort of the thing I'm into. I like to sort of have discussions about these heavy topics and invisible diseases and conflicts and difficult things that people go through. So
Yeah.
I like that term, invisible diseases. That's probably part of the reason why I think Mysterious Skin was so powerful to me, is it's shining a spotlight on something that is typically invisible. And they did such a concise job of depicting the impact of early childhood sexual abuse on growing and youth, and some of the like two very distinct different paths of acting outward and acting inward. And I was kind of blown away by the two lead performances. I'm amazed that less people know about this for Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I think he said himself that he's thankful for being recognized for this movie and for that role, because it's such a sexual role. And after Third Rock from the Sun, so much of what he was doing was so pushed away from that. And now he's like, what, I don't think he's actually been Sexiest Man Alive yet. Maybe he had, I don't know. But like, he's Mr. Suave, and it's bizarre to think that he had such a transition like this, and like people don't know.
Yeah.
Like
the movie itself is just jam packed with all sorts of like metaphors and imagery. The idea of the alien abduction being a metaphor for child abuse, which makes me believe that the woman that I think Brian was seeing, I'm wondering if it's implied that she has been sexually abused, and that she's that she's using this alien idea to like try and cope with it, kind of like Brian was doing. Like,
I'm not sure if that gets touched on more in the book or not, because I haven't read it. But I think that they kind of, at least in the movie, it's sort of left up to your interpretation, because I think it could go either way. Like, that could be the case and it would make sense. Or it could just be that she's, maybe got a little bit of a screw loose, and she's sort of using this alien abduction narrative to be manipulative to anyone who will let her. Either way, it's highlighting abuse from one side or the other, so it still fits into the overall theme of the movie itself.
It just makes so much sense for a child of that age to rationalize something that they can't rationalize developmentally into something recognizable like that, and then carry that with them for so long until they're ready to understand it more. That I didn't even think about it in terms of like a metaphor or being creative. I honestly, I thought it was kind of like traditional. Like as far as people who
Yeah.
have been through that
Yeah.
kind of thing, I was kind of like, oh man. And like I didn't even piece together the blue light thing until they were driving up to the house. And I was
Right.
like,
Right. And then the movie goes through painstaking lengths to show not only the effects on the two lead characters, but specifically with Brian, the effect it's had on uh, his family. Like his
Mhm.
dad left, I think, not long after the event,
Yep.
and it's heavily implied that his dad knows what happened. So I'm wondering. What I get is the dad felt a sense of guilt for not being able to protect his son and just kind of
Sure.
leaves because of that. And then the mother is overly protective at this point, most likely
Mhm.
because she knows what happened. And when with Neil, you get like the complete opposite thing. He was so secretive about it that only one person in his intermediate circle knew what was going on, and uh, it's a bad
The-
situation all around.
Neil says a very interesting thing that I want your guys' take on, which is he's describing what happened when he brought Brian, and he says his job when he brought others around.
Hmm.
And it's this whole unexplored narrative. And the thing that tipped me out to this is you pointed out that the dad acts like he maybe knew what happened or couldn't protect him. I'm like, yeah, if you found your kid in the middle of a field with a bloody nose, like after being disappeared for a while, you would think you had, failed to protect him
Hmm.
just off of that right there. But no, there's this sort of story we didn't see of other kids potentially on the baseball team, potentially not,
Hmm.
being brought in until this coach left town.
Hmm.
Right.
And why did he leave town? Like, what
Right.
is that? What do you all think? Like, what is going on? What's
No,
going on here?
I think you're on the right path. I think he left before the parents could do anything, and once they
Mhm.
found out, he was already gone.
Well, we know that he wasn't arrested or he didn't go that far because there's the 2 years later Halloween scene where Brian briefly sees him without his
Mhm.
glasses.
Hmm.
So we know that he's at least close enough to make a quick trip back and he's not in any kind of facility.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, it's up to interpretation, but I think what makes the most sense is that he's living in like a trailer, something that's kind of like cheap and easy to, get in and out of. So he's probably just kind of not staying in one place for very long or putting himself in positions where he knows that he's not going to run into a lot of trouble or get caught.
Right. Like, I'm not gonna lie. This was a very uncomfortable movie for me to watch. Uh,
Well, the
with
honesty of it.
yeah,
Mhm.
but but I can't help but appreciate the filmmaking aspect of it. There's like it's very
You
blunt.
gotta wonder if the author of the novel has been through something like this and is
I think it
processing
is based on
something.
his life. Yeah.
Mm.
Uh,
And then even like going back into the effects, like I don't know if you guys got this impression, but when Joseph Gordon-Levitt is announcing the baseball game for the first time, that you see him and a kid walks in and he's overly affectionate to him, I was like, the first thought that went to my mind is, oh, is he going down that road? Is that what's going on?
I feel like it's not. I feel like it's coming more from an angle of he sees the innocence in
Mm.
children,
Mhm.
and I think it's more of a place of wanting to preserve and appreciate that, and less of a
like a
predatory
protective
place.
instinct.
Okay.
Mhm.
It's just so it's like the predatory elements and the protective elements look so similar. It's hard to do
Yeah.
it, and there are a lot of offenders who were victims as a predictive cause of that. But I didn't get the impression. Like I feel like we're seeing all of the honest like secrets. I think Curtis, to answer your question, the ending scene probably tells you what you need to know about his character in terms of wanting to hold him while he's shaking and talk him through what happened. But he's always holding him. He's not betraying any lines of safety.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's more highlighting the fact that because of the experience that he had as a child, his understanding of how to communicate with others, especially men and children, is just
Mhm.
not correct.
Mm. So, do you guys have any criticisms of the movie? Anything that you would not have done that way? Or, I got a big criticism, which is they made me think about this stuff.
That's probably the only thing that I can think of. Like it's a very uncomfortable truth. It will make you sick to your stomach watching this movie. I was laying in bed when I was watching this, and there were multiple times where I just had to curl up because of what I was seeing. Like,
I think for me, and this is like this is such a silly little nitpick. There's one thing that happens in this movie that every time I've watched it, I've just been like, I don't know if they should have put that in there. It's a little weird. And it's just the scene where they see the UFO and they go and they stand up on the roof and you see the UFO fly over. And I get, and maybe this is just because it's like a product of the fact that it's a 2004 movie. And I know that they showed it and they did the whole thing to make it feel very real and fantastical and like you're in the kids' like imagination. So, but the effects are like just not quite good enough. So it feels like a little hokey. And I feel like it kind of detracts a little bit from the realism of the rest of the film. And it's a little confusing because it makes you think like, wait, was that real? When like obviously it wasn't, when you figure out what happened. So when you've seen the whole movie and you know what's happened and you're looking back on that scene, it's like, why did they like show that whole thing?
You could make the argument that by adding it in, it like you said, it takes away from it instead of leaving it up to the viewer's imagination. And
well, we're talking 2004. The X-Files had been a thing for a while. So being able to come up with more creative ways to show lighting and imply an abduction and have the family looking up saying like it's a UFO. Look, it's a very interesting showing it that bluntly, like ET is happening in the movie. I agree with that. His relationship with his sister is another thing I'd like to have seen more of.
She wasn't in the movie very much, and I feel like the child version of her was great and felt very real, and like there was a relationship there. But the adult version of her didn't really have any lines. Like she had like maybe 2 lines. They were very short and they weren't really about anything.
Right.
So that character, I feel like most of the cast in this movie is absolutely stellar. But I would say that the character who plays Brian's older sister as an adult feels a little cardboardy.
I can see that.
It's not the most egregious thing, but I agree that could have been probably done a little bit better.
Yeah, because there's always that question of allies who are there when the thing happens to you. And I think there's a huge thing that happens there with Neil, that like Neil was there when it happened. And, his sister never maybe really got a straight real answer, but she was always supportive of no, like he was, no, like he, went through these things. And I just, it would have been nice to see like how that relationship developed, because you got to think that the majority of the people watching this movie are going to be people who want to be supportive of someone who's been through something like this. And so taking the time to show how someone like a sister could have been supportive would have probably been a really important puzzle piece.
I do think that one thing that is important to know for viewers who aren't as familiar with sort of how things work on a film set or what kind of steps might have been taken in the process of making a movie with this kind of content. The children in the movie, in the way that it's filmed, it feels very much like those kids are in the scene with this man and it's happening. But the reality is that the director actually did give the children completely different scripts. And they, at the time of filming the movie, did not know what the content of those scenes actually was. So it was very safe and they were protected. And I just feel like that's probably like a good just thing for people to know going into this movie so that they don't feel extra uncomfortable when they see those scenes and wonder like, how on earth did they get away with shooting that? They were very respectful of all of the child actors and regarding, the sexual themes and everything. So I just think that's like a good disclaimer to put
I
out.
think
Yes.
they did too good of a job with that, and the NC-17 rating didn't help my anticipation of what the hell am I about to look at. But the looking directly in the camera so that they could shoot the actors completely separate from one another just made that way too personal.
Right. Right, and then just this, I don't know, like, again, like going into the amount of detail, like when they're investigating the dead cow, and the guy is and Brian is sticking his hand elbow deep into the cow.
Yep.
That's all I'm gonna say about that.
And that's the thing is, it's important because there's sort of, for victims, I did read one reviewer, the independent reviewer, someone who had been through something in their past and was watching it and just felt numb and felt rattled, by the movie. And I don't know what it would be like for someone who's been through this to watch this movie, but I can only imagine that there's a certain amount of giving you permission to acknowledge the details of what happened. And I think that's important.
Yeah,
so I would watch this again.
I mean, would you though?
I would actually watch this again. I just watched a fantastic 2019 thriller about sexual abuser played by the guy who played Littlefinger from Game of Thrones.
Oh, wow.
Called Rose Plays Julie, I believe.
Okay.
And it was used to teach ethics, an ethics course that I was going to. And this had a very similar vibe to me. This, in terms of teaching people, like, and understanding the impact on trauma and understanding what might be healing for somebody versus what are some warning signs to look out for someone who's been through something like this. I just think it has such utility, like, that it'd be important, and I think I might end up sharing it with some people. So
that's great.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I probably would as well, if only just as to have that constant reality check, of like the darker side of humanity. Like I've heard stories about stuff like this, and it's about as uncomfortable as actually watching this film. At least with this film, everyone involved is relatively safe and unharmed. It's just what you're seeing is terrible, and that makes
save
it
that one scene.
that makes it just a little bit better than hearing what actually happened to someone in a police report or filing, where it just makes you want to,
you can tell yourself it's only a movie. It's only a movie.
Right, exactly. So there's that extra layer of protection while this film is being so brutally honest about the darker aspects of human nature. And I really like Gordon. I really like Joseph Gordon-Levitt's performance in this. Brian, like, he could come off as stale, but he's also kind of meant to, with the just being incredibly numb, empty. Which that's another reason why I would go back to watch it, just to look at the actual effects that something like this could have on people. I do think it's an important movie that people should watch, but you have to be prepared for what you're about to see.
Yeah. I wasn't. The first time that I saw this movie, I think I was 17, and so this would have been in, like, I don't know, 2009 or 2010, sometime around then. And I was going through a phase where I was just kind of watching a lot of, like, LGBT dramas and kind of just catching up on, like, more underground movies. And I came across this one. I watched the trailer for it, which is one of the most misleading trailers I've ever seen in my life.
Probably for good reason, but yeah.
And I went into it. I knew it was going to be a drama. I knew there'd be some emotional scenes. I knew that, there might be some parts that were a little uncomfortable, but I was not expecting the scope of how uncomfortable it would be. And I went into it with just no idea, and I watched it by myself in the dark on my computer. And I remember when the final scene ended and the credits started to roll, just being slack-jawed, and just I wanted to cry, and I couldn't, because I was so surprised by what I had just seen, and I was so emotionally captivated, and, like, my heart hurt for the characters.
Yeah.
And I'm glad on a personal level that I went into it like that, because I feel like it was so much more impactful for me to have watched it without any knowledge about what was going to happen. But I would never recommend that somebody do that now that I know what it is.
Right. The closest thing I've seen to this is the only other NC-17 movie I've seen, Crash by David Cronenberg, which is about people who get sexually aroused by being in near fatal car crashes.
Yep.
Again, it makes you think of the NC-17 rating and think like, oh no, what am I going to see?
Right.
But I wouldn't be put off by that. I feel like the directors were arguing for it to not be NC-17, and I agree it should be NC-17 because what they are implying is certainly that.
Mm-hmm.
But okay.
Thanks again, everyone, for watching another episode of This Film Not Rated. Again, we are a branch of the Drive-In Podcast Network. Be sure to check out the other podcasts, like This Week of the Movies with Eric and Matthew Fox. What's the Friday Night Lights one? I want to say it's the I can't remember what the football one is anymore. It's not the David Delight because that's no longer going on. But just be sure to check it out. There's a bunch of great content on there that you're sure to enjoy. I am Curtis. You can find me on Twitter at 90sgamer407 and on Twitch at Merrick_tainment.
Thank you guys so much for having me on again. It's always a pleasure to talk with you guys about movies.
Thank you.
My name is Groucho, short for Groucho Porks. I stream on Twitch with the username Groucho Porks, so you can find me there, and on socials with the same username.
All right.
Anybody have any last remarks?
Aren't you gonna do your thing?
What thing?
You haven't given yourself.
I'm at High Contrast FLM. You can find me anywhere at that handle. So.